What's up guys, hope you guys are doing good. So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto was born in Lucis Caelum Family and becomes the Kings of Lucis, part 1. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, TheDemonKingNaruto, link is in the description, and also subscribe to our channel and like this video. So let's get into the video. In the far reaches of the ruined city of Midgar in the outskirts of Edge, there was a cataclysmic battle taking place. A battle that threatened to break the already fragile peace brought upon by the actions of a few. A battle that nearly brought back the nightmare that threatened to swallow the world all those years ago. A battle that was fought with the intent of bringing back the entity of terror itself. A battle that had come to an end, but at a great cost. Finally it's over, thought Cloud Strife, as he surveyed the world, his world, with a feeling of content even amongst his numerous injuries and current blood loss, and suddenly he felt a sense of relief wash over him from the healing rain of the lifestream, which began to fall from the sky and pelt his skin as it poured onto the inhabitants of Edge. He had at last finished off Sephiroth once and for all, and was at last free from him, free from the torment of his mind. Nothing could have made him more content than at that moment, as he felt the geostigma within him, like everyone else infected with it, be cleansed from their bodies by the rain. Yet, as this was happening, Yazu and Laz struggled behind him, and unknown to Cloud, they were beginning to charge all their remaining power for one last desperate attack. It came too fast for him to shake himself from his state of content. The loud bang of a firearm sounded off. Surprised, the former mercenary took a step forward from the sudden impact as the bullet pierced his body, yet he didn't even let it slow him down. Shaking himself from the content he was in, Cloud merely glanced over his shoulder, his blue-green eyes narrowing dangerously at the last remaining resistance of this battle. Tsurugi gleaming in hand, he spun on his heels. Cloud didn't even register the pain racking his entire body as he turned around and charged at them as they charged their maximum power into their last attack. Jumping into the air, Cloud separated one sword from his main weapon, and in a dual strike of ferocity and precision, he came down with the force of a meteor, and just as they collided, an explosion rocked the tower. The explosion expanded into a giant sphere of Mako and fire which consumed much of the battlefield. Yet something unexpected occurred, as Yazu and Laz were literally wiped from existence, and that was the fact that Cloud's body started going back to the life stream. This was a natural occurrence for all inhabitants of Gaia. You were born from the lifestream, and so too would you return from whence you came, but this was a different circumstance, for Cloud's death was left in the hands of the lifestream's will. It did not wish for this fate to be put upon the soul, and thus it allowed two avatars, manifestations of their past physical bodies and embodiments of the lifestream's will, to directly intervene in Cloud's death. A young man named Zack Fair and a beautiful young woman named Aerith Gainsborough watched Cloud's soul in both sadness yet pride, and upon sharing a glance with one another, Zack merely smiled before giving a soft nod to her, which she returned with one of her own. Wordlessly coming to agreement, the two raised their hands to the remnants of Cloud's soul, and with the will of the lifestream backing them, they enforced their will upon their old friend with a simple yet friendly push. "Go live a better life than this, be happy, Cloud," was Aerith's fleeting thoughts as she vanished into the lifestream. "And keep yourself from dying this time, will ya? Maker knows Aerith will be severely angry with you if we have to see you again so soon. Be good now." Zack offered his last words to his wayward protege before he too followed Aerith's example and vanished into the lifestream. And with that action made, Cloud's soul departed from the lifestream and was thrust into a very different world than his own, but was just as connected. Yet the actions of the lifestream could not be perceived without consequence. And consequences were indeed to be true with this soul's selfish action. Anahagakure no Sato forests. The day was a good day to be one, Namikaze Minato, Yondaime Hokage, the Konoha no Kairoi Sanctum, and soon to be father. It was a good day indeed. Because, well, he was quickly losing all feeling in his hand, which was squeezed with bone-crushing force by his dear beloved wife, Uzumaki Kushina, as she began to give birth to their child, and it was an incredibly difficult task to lend his support to her, as he used his other hand to keep her seal in check, keeping the legendary Kikbi no Yoko within her at bay. Thankfully he had the support of predecessor's wife, Sarutobi Bawako. Still, well, the thought of his wife in so much pain hurt him, yet the excitement of their child soon to be born made him both proud and excited. Crack. "Oh dear Kami." Minato internally wailed at the pain his wife was unleashing on him. He was sure she fractured or broke a few of his fingers. Still, he showed none of this on the outside as he remained focused on the task at hand. He had to endure for Kushina and for his son. Yet, so focused was he that neither he nor any of the other occupants never noticed the ethereal green spirit enter Kushina's womb, where her baby boy began to awaken. It was only when the cries of a newborn baby boy sounded off in the chamber of Kushina's delivery In the span of a moment the family of three had a single chance of happiness as Minato put their son into Kushina's awaiting arms and his arm around her as they looked from each other and into the eyes of their newborn son. "He's so beautiful, Minato." Kushina spoke as she gazed lovingly at their little boy in her arms. Her violet gems twinkled like gems as tears of pure unadulterated happiness cascaded down her eyes, such was her joy that it could have been felt coming off her in waves. Minato, of course, shared her joy as he kissed her head and looked down into the face of their baby boy. While Bawako smiled at the newly family of three with a soft smile of her own. "That he is, Kushina, that he is," Minato uttered to himself, his blue eyes staring down into an equal pair of those very same azure blue eyes. Yet in those round innocent blue orbs, he saw the most mystic of glowing green, that it was almost majestic in its appearance. Their baby boy, their little Naruto, had a full head of short golden fuzz and a tanned complexion from his father. Yet his round eyes clearly came from his mother. The little boy looked up at them through his bleary eyes and gave a mindless gurgle and laughed, causing the two parents' hearts to swell in joy. This moment, this single moment would be forever immortalized into their souls until the day they die and even beyond. It seemed like a good day for the family of three. Until a thump alerted them and Minato's senses went on high alert and he turned just in time to see his personal guard and Bawako laying dead at the feet of a cloaked man with an orange mask. "Bawako Abasama." Kushina cried out while Minato stood before his wife and child protectively as his icy blue eyes narrowed on the intruder. "Greetings, Yondaime Hokage, a wonderful night is it not?" spoke the stranger and Minato knew at that moment that today, this miraculous day of joy and happiness, was about to take a sudden turn for the worst. Unfortunately for him and Kushina, neither of the two would truly know how bad it was about to turn, especially for their newborn child. On Hagakure Hospital. In the darkness of the Konoha hospital, lit only by the flickering overhead lights, the nursery was filled with a good solid number of newborns. A nurse's working night shift came up and did routine checkups for all the newborns, making sure they were healthy and okay before moving on. This was the case as the last nurse went over the last newborns for the usual checkup before she left the nursery. And, as the door closed behind her, the shadows of the four corners seemed to twitch before four bodies dropped from the shadowed corners. Each wearing an animal mask and a standard Anbu uniform, but a clean cut to their throat silenced them quick and clean. Landing at their bodies in a quiet crouch, the four cloaked shinobi bowed their heads in obedience as a fifth figure walked out from the dark reaches of the nursery. It was an older man, crippled and heavily scarred from his current appearance. Walking in with a cane in hand, his lone beady eye stared amongst the newborns with a calculative and indifferent expression. Until a certain glint passed his eye as he made his way toward the target of his interest. Got rid of the bodies in a silent gesture they did as commanded and went to collectively take the bodies, removing any evidence of them ever being there before vanishing in a swirl of smoke and leaves. As they left in their master's wake, the bandaged man soon came up to a lone cradle in the far corner of the nursery and upon seeing the name of the babe, he stopped just at the side of it. Looking down, Shimura Danzo's lone eye narrowed as his face crinkled into a frown. "Hiruzen may have forbid me from taking you, but that does not mean I cannot ensure Konoha's safety for the future," he said, staring down at the sleeping newborn boy known as Uzumaki Naruto. Digging into one of his pockets, he pulled out a single paper tag with multiple kanji written upon it. Channeling chakra into the paper tag, he gently laid it across the newborn boy's abdomen, causing the boy's own seal to respond. Putting his hand up, he uttered only one word. "Seal." And in a small display of chakra infusion, Danzo watched as the kanji upon his paper tag melded off the fabric and into the boy's flesh. Bypassing the original seal placed upon him and hidden deep upon the layers of the Shiki Fujin. Soon enough, the kanji for his seal was completely unnoticeable to all but the most trained eye in the art of Fuinjutsu. And with this, Konoha's future is assured. Without sparing a glance, he turned away, never noticing the fact the boy's eyes opened marginally to stare straight at his fleeting back. The newborn boy's eyes were a distinctive shade of azure with a greenish glow, but that green majestic glow began to disappear from his pupils until it was no longer existent, and without another word the young boy fell back to the realm of lullabies. 14 years later, Forest of Death. Within the Forest of Death, we could find four figures in the area, one of whom was trembling in fear as she watched one of her teammates steep himself in trouble. She had long pink hair and worried sea-green eyes, which stared up in fright for the opponent her team was combating, and she began to fear for her teammates. She was wearing a red kippao dress that had white designs. She also had black biker shorts underneath, while wearing normal blue shinobi sandals with a Konoha forehead protector. This young girl was Haruno Sakura of Team 7, under the Jonin leadership of Hada Kakashi. Another one was a boy that had the pitch black hair that stood up in the form similar to a duck's rear end. He had pale skin with coal black eyes that were currently staring at his comrade and best friend, although he would never admit it to anyone, in a fear that made his entire body tremble. He had the usual blue Uchiha high-collared shirt with white shorts, he had bandages wrapped around his legs with blue shinobi sandals, as well. Lastly, he had a Konoha forehead protector, as well. This boy's name was Uchiha Sasuke of the prestigious Uchiha clan. He was of the three of the last remaining Uchihas alive, him being one, his traitorous brother being the second, and his beloved mother being the last. The cause of this? It was because his older brother, Uchiha Itachi, one night butchered the whole clan, leaving him and his mother alive. He never knew the whole reasons as to why he did it, but in the end he ultimately decided he would avenge his clan by killing his brother. A decision that always worried his mother, but the damage dealt by Itachi on that night was far too severe for even her to handle alone. But right now, that was the farthest thing from Sasuke's mind, as he was stuck in a literal state of both terror, shock, and confusion as he watched his teammate fight off their opponent. Akusa Kunoichi that had earlier crippled him, and Sakura with a saturated feeling of killing intent. So intense it was, it made Zabuza's in the past pale in comparison. It was a suffocating feeling that made what little common sense Sasuke had go out the window. At that moment in time he wanted nothing more than to die, throw himself into a hole, curl up like a worm, and die just to end the madness. Yet when he was able to come back to his senses and try to flee the Kunoichi, he was unable to break free of the Kunoichi's sight. Yet in the last moment of what seemed to be his last fleeting moments of life, Sasuke saw something truly unprecedented and shocking. It lit a fire in him to see it really, to see his blonde idiot of a teammate show up in the nick of time, and even more amazingly, the blonde was seemingly ignoring the killing intent coming off this Kunoichi in waves, and just start pummeling her giant snake summon into the earth below them. It was devastating yet awe-inspiring to the Uchiha. In a moment of sheer guts, anger, and resolve, his teammate, the dove, had come up and pummeled the giant snake with his fists before going after its master. He was like a blur of yellow and orange to his eyes, moving far faster than he had ever seen him move before. Just watching what he did made Sasuke feel a number of emotions, most of which were similar to respect, jealousy, and a bit of fear for the blonde. But the most confusing emotion was admiration. What the hell, Naruto? Sasuke thought as he looked on, watching the boy take on the Kusa Kunoichi with little to no restraint. Sakura, and Sasuke's teammate of Team 7, was a young man with a full mop of golden spiky locks which fell past his ears and his bangs nearly covering his Konoha headband. He had a tanned complexion with 6 whisker marks marring his cheeks. The young man wore an orange tracksuit with blue shinobi sandals and a crimson swirl etched into the back of his suit. But his clothing was less than satisfactory due to it being in tatters, burned, or torn in other areas. However, the most unique part of the boy besides his whisker marks were the eyes he held. Glowing scarlet-slitted orbs narrowed dangerously upon the Kunoichi with an anger that would have made any lesser of a being fall to their knees. The blood that dribbled down his head and around his eyes only increased the fearsome expression the young blonde wore. "I'm going to kill you, team." The blonde spoke in a voice that was his own, yet wasn't at the same time. It was both deep and rough, yet it carried something deeper. More sinister. Now this was Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of the Kikbi no Yoko, and right now he was fighting against this Kusa Kunoichi with all he had. His whole body was shaking with exhaustion, his body was a mess, and his vision was blurry, but he simply refused to fall down. He'd finally pulled himself out of one giant snake's stomach only to come and find out that this team was hurting his teammates. That was a line never to be crossed. Ever. His crimson orbs narrowed dangerously as the Kunoichi on the other hand simply smirked with an equal amount of interest and curiosity. Her beady black orbs seemed to stare into those eyes of Naruto's without hesitation. If anything, she felt an old thrill of excitement go down her body as she saw the anger in his eyes flare up. Originally, I wanted this little brat out of my way, but there's something off about him, and it's not the fox's power either. Thought the Kunoichi as she took notice of a slight flickering of a familiar chakra source coming off the boy, and it was only then did she let loose a cruel smile, a smile fitting for one as cruel, twisted, and demented as she. "Oh? So that's it then, very clever Danzo, but you were never one to utilize Fuinjutsu correctly. Your seals have always been crude, barbaric, outdated even, but I am surprised sensei never noticed it until now." The Kunoichi thought before returning her glance to blonde before her. In the span of seconds, multiple thoughts and scenarios began to run through her, or rather his mind, until he ultimately came to a rather devious plan. Danzo's seal can be taken away, unleashing whatever he wanted locked away, but judging from the ferocity I just faced earlier, why should I stop there? Thought the snake in hiding. Its current vessel's beady eyes seemed to shift into those akin to a snake, amber orbs with slitted pupils. Deciding to further test the boy he spoke to. "Oh? Are you angry? Do you hate me?" You do know, if you don't kill me, I will make you watch as I kill your two little friends below us, slowly and painfully. She taunted, jeering the boy with a motion of his hand. Naruto merely snarled, baring his overly large fangs in response. If it was possible, his crimson orbs seemed to glow even more with sinister primal ferocity. I won't let you. And in a burst of speed, Naruto vanished from his spot in a burst of speed. The tree he was on suddenly exploded from the sheer force of his jump, but he didn't seem to care at that moment. All he cared about was wiping that smug smirk off this theme's face. To the naked and untrained eye, Naruto just vanished, but to his opponent, Naruto was still moderately coming at him, speeds akin to a jonin. Easily he dodged his wild strike, and he watched with intrigue as his strike leveled trees for a good distance, but the boy burst out from the smoke, faster than he was before. It was really impressive considering the boy's current situation. If what he sensed was accurate, then the boy was going beyond the limitations placed upon him. But still not fast enough. He thought idly, as he easily dodged Naruto's furious strikes, punches, and wild kicks. From just observing the boy's lack of style, he could already tell the boy utilized a brawler sort of fighting style. No doubt because he was never taught an initial fighting stance, one among the many intentional flaws made in his academic history, but the boy made up for it with his unpredictability. But that wouldn't amount to much with the threats the boy would face in the future. Dodge, weave, block, grab, and throw, dodge, weave, block, duck, counter. It was becoming more akin to a dance of destruction at this point, as the further Naruto attacked the more ferocious he became. His speed increased, his strength grew, and with each missing attack he carved up the forest. Each blocked fist or kick sent shockwaves all across the forest, shattering tree branches and causing the ground to crater with clash. The boy's two teammates could no longer see the battle happening before them. It was no longer a battle they could perceive, not even with the famed Uchiha Sharingan eye. It was no longer a battle between Chunin hopefuls. This was a battle of something else. Naruto, what's happening to you? Sasuke thought in worry. Yes, he would admit it to himself, in the solace of his own mind. He was worried for his teammate because Naruto was clearly not acting like his old self. This wasn't the happy-go-lucky blonde he knew, the stubborn hothead that didn't know when to back down. This wasn't the boy he knew from the academy when they were children. This wasn't the Naruto he knew. Then he heard a crash, and next came a yell that honestly sent a chill down the Uchiha's spine. Stop running. With a snarl, the blonde dug his heel into the ground and vanished far faster than his opponent originally expected. And that moment of surprise cost him, as the air was ripped out of him, as Naruto's fist sunk into his chest. The punch was so powerful that it reached further, passing his ribsage and stretching out his back. Continuing on with his attack, he grabbed the woman's head and nailed her face into his knee. Grabbing her by the hair, he continued by repeatedly slamming her face into the ground. Still, the grin on the Kunoichi's face spoke of euphoria, as if she or he had finally found a prospect worthy of his attention. This boy interests me so much. There is no denying it now, he's the one I need the most. His thoughts couldn't be swayed even, as Naruto continued to bash his head into the ground without a shred of mercy. Never threaten to hurt my friends again. With each slam, the ground cratered further, and with one wildly charged chakra-enhanced slam, he buried the Kunoichi into the ground as the ground cracked and upheaved. The entire forest of death quaked as Naruto slammed his opponent so hard into the ground that half of her body was deeply embedded into the earth, while the other half was laying limp. Snarling at the limp body, Naruto remained where he was, glaring at the supposed corpse of his opponent. Worry and suspicion was clear as day in his ruby-red slitted eyes. But his ears perked when he heard light footsteps coming toward, and he spun on his heel, claws out and fangs bared. Only to stop dead in his tracks when he saw a pair of coal-black orbs staring back at him. At that moment, Naruto realized he was staring at his rival, but as he looked at the Uchiha, he began to take notice of something odd about him. Maybe it was the subconscious of his brain telling him this or something else, but it was like he was looking at Sasuke for the first time. Something was off with the theme. Oh, calm down, she's dead, we're safe, just calm down, okay? Sasuke asked for Naruto, who could only stare into the Uchiha's coal orbs with his ruby-red eyes. Taking in the Uchiha's overall appearance with a tilt of his head, and it was only then, Naruto's eyes narrowed in what seemed to be confusion. Team? You have something different about you. Naruto commented in his rough tone of voice, but the Uchiha's eyes widened only marginally, but it was enough for Naruto to see. Yet before he could continue, the both felt the ground beneath them vibrate. Naruto's eyes widened, yet he couldn't react fast enough. Shooting up from the ground from behind him, a ghostly pale man with long black hair stretched out his neck and with lightning fast speed he struck, sinking his fangs into Naruto's collarbone. Channeling his chakra and a bit of his soul into the boy's own, he took a moment of relish and satisfaction as he saw his own experimental cursed seal of hell easily form around the bite mark. He easily noticed Naruto beginning to weaken from the sudden intrusion of his soul and his own vile chakra, and he took a moment to glance at the shell-shocked Uchiha as Orochimaru of the legendary Sannin spoke the Uzumaki. Very clever of you to notice, Naruto Ku, and I do believe you're the first besides Sasuke's Ka-san to notice his little situation. But that's the least of your worries right now. He said with a hiss before he struck Sasuke with the same mark. And for Naruto, that sight alone was seared into his brain. The screams of pain that came from Sasuke tore at him more than he would have ever imagined. Damn it, what is this, the blonde thought as the crimson bled away from his eyes as his body began to weaken more and more until he could no longer support himself. Falling flat on his back, he could only stare up into tree branches. His body began to convulse painfully, but he could only let out grunts or racking coughs. But through the dimming of his vision, Naruto saw the man, his opponent, coming toward him. And he only heard him say one thing before he saw darkness. "Now let's get rid of this nasty little seal on you, spoke Orochimaru as he went to work getting off the archaic seal placed upon the Uzumaki. The Uchiha behind him was already convulsing in the same situation as the blonde. Originally, Orochimaru never planned to utilize the seal he gave the blonde, let alone marking the Uzumaki in the first place. Yet something about him intrigued him to go ahead and do it anyway. Still, as he ripped away the last bit of Danzo's seal from the boy's original seal, Orochimaru bore witness to one change just before he was forced to leave the area. And it was something that truly made his eyes twinkle in deep interest. For the boy's dull blue eyes sparked to life, generating a glow of majestic green. Royal, divine, mystical, but that was all Orochimaru was able to see before the boy's eyelids fell. Sighing, Orochimaru shook his head. "Oh well, I'll just wait to see what more you can show me, Naruto-kun. Survive and endure. If you are anything like your Nindo, then survive until the next time we meet." And with a fleeting glance at the Uchiha, Orochimaru vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving a broken Team 7 in his wake. Unknown to him, however, this single act of interest and curiosity would fundamentally change the world. Naruto's mindscape. Within the depths of Uzumaki Naruto's mindscape, the sewer-like system that it was. The ankle-high water suddenly rippled as a long and strong rumble ripped across the very depths of his mind, but what followed was something that was out of this world. For bright green liquid suddenly flooded the tunnels and pipes of Naruto's chakra network. It was a fast, unstoppable current that would not be stopped. It ripped across the mindscape, cleansing the impurities it came in contact with, and in result what was left was only strengthened and augmented by the green liquid. The flood of liquid soon came upon the cage sheltering the legend, the Kikbi no Yoko. One of its eyes opened lazily only to widen in surprise as the strange liquid came toward him. Feeling such surprise and confusion for the first time in its long lifespan, they reacted in the only manner it could. "What in the sage's name is this?" The great fox roared in defiance of the otherworldly energy, but it didn't seem to deter its path in the slightest, and it could do nothing as the energy easily bypassed its cage and began to fill up the Kyuubi's cage. The effect of the liquid on the Kyuubi was instant as its liquid form exploded into particles of emerald which soon began to swallow up to the great. The great fox struggled against the strange unique energy, but it was to no avail as it found itself consumed by the energy. And with that, darkness followed. Yet in that darkness, Uzumaki Naruto awoke to find himself floating upon a sea of emeralds. Fireflies lit up the darkness that surrounded him, and in that situation, he couldn't find himself questioning why or where he was. He just felt a sense of contentment of where he was. As if he belonged here, for one reason or another. "This place feels familiar to me," thought the young blonde, and it was only then did he let loose a frown as a small trickle of annoyance began to flow through the back of his skull. What is this?" His hands went to scratch at his skull, and that single movement of erratic behavior caused him to sink like an anchor into the ocean of emerald. Yet he paid no mind as he sank, his fingernails merely dug into his scalp as memories of a life that was not his flooded his brain. It came to him in a hurricane of memories and images, and the pain that followed made him scream, but all that came out was bubbles. He grit his teeth in pain. He saw everything from his past life of cloud strife. How his life went from his childhood with his best friend Tifa Lockhart and through his adventure in Midgar meeting Zack Fair, becoming a Shinra security officer to a soldier, to eventually a mercenary for hire. He saw everything from when Zack died, dying to protect him from Shinra's main force, to when he helped his friends on the planet called Gaia. How he faced Sephiroth at the time of his resurrection, defeating the last remnants of his will that is until the explosion. His eyes snapped wide open at this as he sunk deeper and deeper until he eventually hit the bottom. Yet his eyes became glassy as he tried to recollect on the memories granted to him. The strangeness of the events was just as confusing as his current situation. "Okay, my name is Uzumaki Naruto. I was Cloud Strife from a planet called Gaia. I was a mercenary that helped take down Shinra. I had friends who I fought beside to take down a man who called himself Sephiroth. After 2 years, remnants of Sephiroth came back with the intention of reuniting with Unova and bringing Sephiroth back from the livestream. Everyone fought them until I had met them at a standoff at the outskirts of Edge. There I fought Kadage, who released a materia that brought back Sephiroth once more into the world. We fought until I landed the finishing strike on him. After that he transformed back into Kadage and he went back to the livestream while Aerith left a healing rain to cure the geostigma within Midgar and Edge. After this I was shot by the last remaining remnants and then I charged Yuzu and Laz, which ended up in that explosion. After that I was knocked out of his thoughts when he heard a voice echo with the depths of the Mako Sea. It sounded like Aerith. "Aerith, is that you? Where are you?" Mentally calling out to her. "Don't worry, Cloud, me, Zack, and the ancients decided you were to be given a new life, one where you could be reborn to help this world like you did for Gaia," said Aerith, which Cloud frowned at as he looked around to try and find Aerith amongst the ocean of Mako. "I was reborn." "Yes you were, for you see we decided you were to be given this chance," she said, causing Cloud Naruto's frown to deepen at this bit of information. It was just so much to take in at once, but the thought of his friends and comrades made him stand up at attention. "What about the others?" "All I remember is the explosion then here," he said. "They still live on Gaia peacefully after what you did," she said, causing the ex-soldier to smile a little, knowing that what he had done wasn't a waste. Yet one question plagued him. "Why is this only happening now? Why did it take so long?" he asked, and he could feel her displeasure in a sense. "The process started when Uzumaki Naruto was brought into this world, yet an old man did something to you, and it had a delayed effect on the emergence between you and the Naruto of this world." That made his frown turn into a deep scowl, but as hard he tried he couldn't dig up any memory of that happening. Then again his mind was probably a jumbled mess, so it would take time to organize his memories. "I see one thing was for certain, he will find the one who did it to him." Now Cloud Eye the woman was cut off as Cloud interrupted her with his own thoughts. "Naruto, I am no longer Cloud Strife, I am just Uzumaki Naruto, Aerith," he said, wanting to get that across. He may have been Cloud Strife at one point in his life, but here and now he was just Uzumaki Naruto. He could feel Aerith's surprise, that is until her warmth enveloped him. "Yes, that's right Naruto, that is who you are now. You're Naruto, and Naruto is you, one in the same. Bound forever as one, something that will never change until I can welcome you back with open arms. Yes, until then Aerith, take care," and upon this farewell Naruto closed his eyes and smiled, causing the Mako Sea around him to explode in a show of green glowing particles. All around the depths of his mindscape the liquid turned into particles that seemed into the pipes of his chakra network. And in the darkness once again, Naruto reopened his eyes, revealing a pair of sharp blue eyes, glowing a deep mystical green hue that pierced the veil of ebony around him. "Now I need to protect Sasuke and Sakura and escape this damned forest." And with that single thought Naruto slowly dematerialized as well. Baruno Sakura was worried, no scratch that, she was beyond the point of worry. To say she was concerned would be an understatement of her short 13 years of living. In all her life, Sakura had never felt so much fear as she did now at this very moment, and it all started with the Chunin exam. It had been an entire mess the moment it began. The written exam alone was a harsh test alone, a test that stood as a testament to the shinobi way of subterfuge and espionage. Then came the second part of the exam, a survival mission to step into the forest of death and claim both a heaven and earth scroll before reaching the central tower within a time frame of 5 days without any outside help. There was no sense to back them up, and so they were left to fend for themselves and survive on their own skills. It was a battle, but one they had truly never expected to face. They had underestimated the amount of skill these other shinobi had, and for that they paid the consequence of being attacked by her. Sakura trembled from just thinking about Kusa Kunoichi. The encounter with the woman had been an experience she would never forget. To see just how outclassed they were by her, how she systematically destroyed both her and Sasuke down with just a simple enforcement of killing intent. It was nothing like their encounter with Zabuza Mamachi on their first C-A rank mission. The killing intent was dense, suffocating. She had seen herself die multiple times in all types of different scenarios, all of which made her feel like nothing but a bug to that Kunoichi. But their salvation came in the most unexpected way. Her third teammate, Uzumaki Naruto, arrived on the scene. His arrival saved her and Sasuke from the Kunoichi, but that thought was dashed when she saw how different her blonde teammate was acting. It may have been a situation that held their lives hanging by a thread, but something about her teammate was different. He wasn't acting like himself at all, coming down with merciless brutality with each attack. Attacking like an animal rather than a man had been one of the key points she noticed before the battle between Naruto and Kunoichi reached all new heights. His screams of rage still echoed in her ears as he decimated the forest around them, chasing down the Kunoichi like she was his prey. Yet the anger, the rage Naruto gave off was undeniable at that moment in time. In all her life, she had never seen Naruto so angry than at that moment in time. Had he been so angry because she and Sasuke were in danger? Furious because they were hurt? Did Naruto think so much of them, of her and Sasuke, as teammates, as friends, that he would go out of his way and fight like that? It was terrifying yet admirable all the same. And thinking back on all the times I've hit him and treated him like crap, and yet he was so worried about us that he became like that. Thinking of such things, Sakura shook her head. After the battle, she only remembered hearing Sasuke scream of pain before running toward his location. Only to find both him and Naruto laying on the ground, both convulsing and sweating profusely. Upon finding her teammates in that condition, she took it upon herself to hide them from any potential prying eyes. Utilizing every basic survival skill she learned from the academy to try and heal her two down teammates. She'd taken refuge by a hollow tree by a nearby riverside and was currently trying to bring her teammates' fever down. As a precaution, she laid out traps around the perimeter, but her skill in traps was nowhere near Naruto's. The blonde had given her tips, and from what she saw of his traps were enough to advance her own. She just hoped it was enough to ward off any potential attacks. Kneeling at their side, she had their heads propped up by bundled up leaves she could scavenge, but the two were literally pouring sweat and were showing terrible reactions to whatever it is the Kunoichi had done to the two of them. At first she looked down at Sasuke, his face was just stuck in a pain-filled expression. Jaw locking up and teeth clenched, short and rapid breaths escaped him. His hair, strangely, was becoming less of its original style as sweat poured from him. It was becoming loose and more straight. It was surprising to her, as she originally believed his hair was that naturally that way. Soaking his rag, Sakura squeezed any excess water out before folding it before placing it over Sasuke's forehead, but there was one thing Sakura noticed about Sasuke, and it was where she figured the pain was coming from. Her worried eyes glanced down at his collarbone to see a black mark, being the shape of 3 tomo. What is that? What did she do to you, Sasuke-kun? Sakura thought before she crawled over to her other teammate, and his current state was nearly similar to Sasuke, except for a few key differences. He was soaked in sweat, his spiky gold locks were matted down, and his face was permanently stuck in an expression of pain. However, his whole body was still carrying a good amount of wounds. She dressed as much as of his wounds as she could, but to her amazement early on she watched as his body began to naturally heal from his wounds. From her understanding of human anatomy, human bodies naturally heal over time, but the process in which she saw Naruto wasn't normal. His healing was abnormally high, kind of like a regenerative process in a sense. At first she thought it was some kind of Kekai Genkai, and it was a plausible theory, but not one she felt would explain it entirely. However, this wasn't all she was noticing from Naruto. For she had also found a mark on his collarbone just like on Sasuke, but instead of them being 3 tomo, she found it to be 3 shapes that resembled something akin to a strange wing of sorts. It was an odd pattern, but if that wasn't enough, the outline of the mark was glowing a light green. Least to say, Sakura was very worried. Naruto may have been an annoying idiot, but he was still her teammate and had been nothing but friendly to her. No matter how badly she treated him, he was still there to offer any kind of help he could. To see him in pain, to see them both in pain like this, and without being able to do anything to ease that pain, ultimately made her feel pretty useless. But I can at least protect you too. Ever since we became a team, I've had to look at your backs, keeping me from harm, but this time I won't let any harm come to any of you. Her eyes narrowed, her green orbs gleaming with that determination. This I promise was her unspoken promise to her 2 teammates. Fling. A sudden ring of a bell made her perk up, and without a sound she pulled out a kunai from her pouch and turned around. Ready and willing to protect her teammates without hesitation, just as they had for her, so too will she. Any thought of fleeing was absent from her mind. The mere thought of such a thing was non-existent to her at this point. She kept quiet, watching the area around her for any sign of movement, and only when she heard a rustle did she act. Clang. Effectively blocking hurled kunai and shuriken, Sakura was caught by surprise when coming from the bushes was a squad of 3, and from their headbands, she realized that it was the Otagaker genin from the written exam. The leader, she supposed, was the mummified boy with a metallic arm. But reflexes, girl, now why don't you step aside? The boy spoke, and Sakura merely kept her narrowed gaze on the 3. And why should I? Replying was all she said. Fear was beginning to settle in, but just remembering why she was doing this, to protect her teammates, was all she needed to crush that fear. The boy in question merely stared at her with his lone eye. We are here for no other reason than to kill the Uchiha, little girl, but seeing as you won't abide by my first and only warning, you will die as well. That all he said before the boy beside him burst into action, and all Sakura could do was prepare herself to endure and protect her, the 2 behind her. Sasuke-kun, Naruto, I will keep you both safe. But just as the battle began, no one saw what was happening to the two inside the hollow tree. The fact that Sasuke's body was glowing in vile purple chakra, that his eyes were flickering and twitching. Or the other fact that his body was beginning to change. Nor the fact that Naruto's mark was beginning to be overcome with the green energy from before. Only now it was entirely beginning to consume his whole body. It would only be later until anyone realized that Naruto's body was engulfed in a blazing aura of cyan blue. Anko Mitarashi was, in her own words, a bona fide badass kicking Kanachi, a Konoha Takebetsu Jonin to be exact, and lead assistant in the torture and interrogation unit. She was a woman that none of her peers wanted to ever fight unless they had no other choice because of the sole fact that she was fucking insane. Okay, insane was a strong word, she was just a tad bloodthirsty, but she could be over the top in many aspects, and it was because of that alone, many were afraid to fight her. Because she could be unpredictable, and fighting an unpredictable opponent that was able to utilize deadly poisonous snakes at her beck and call was a dangerous opponent. That wasn't even accounting for her skill in traps, taijutsu, and ninjutsu. Honestly, she could have made Jonin by this point if it weren't for the fact that she was denied the chance every time the exams came up. The Hokage's council, the two old bags of bones that they were still suspicious of the former student-teacher relationship with Konoha's #1 traitor and the only one who was crazy enough to fight her. Orochimaru of the Sannin. Who she was currently fighting and losing badly. Ah. The woman spat up blood as she hurled backward until she slammed into a tree with enough force to cause the entire tree to shake, but before she could even make another move, multiple snakes wrapped around her, keeping her entirely restrained. Damn it. Letting out a curse, she let her narrowed hate-filled gaze snap in the direction of her opponent, Orochimaru in all his traitorous glory, walking toward her with that damnable smug smirk of his. The way the battle had ended, even after all her training, she still amounted little to the man himself. At first when she tracked him down and began to battle, the woman thought she caught him by surprise, but that thought was quickly erased when it was revealed that he was merely playing with her. Then it was just a matter of him thrashing her, no matter what she did from that point on did nothing to him. He was able to repel her attacks with his own, counter her jutsus with simple but effective elemental earth clones. Bypassing her traps with as much ease as it would be strolling through a park. It was a humbling experience to be sure, but then maybe she was a bit insane to think she could fight someone only another Sannin or the Hokage could fight. Oh Anko-chan, while I did find our little game to be amusing, I must say I'm disappointed that this was all you could do. She heard the snake speak, and his words merely worked to anger her even further. To hell with his disappointment. She wasn't his student anymore. The only thing wanted more was to have his decapitated head on the Hokage's desk, but that seemed to be far from possible with her current situation. Instead she spat out with all the hate she could muster, "What the hell are you doing here, Orochimaru?" It was truly impressive how much hate she held for this man. Then again because of him her life went to shit the moment he turned traitor. It was because of this snake her life became second to Konoha's Jinchuriki in terms of being an outcast. But the Sannin's smirk merely widened as he crouched down to her, bile rose in her throat when he took hold of her chin, causing her to look straight into his snake-like eyes. "Oh, I'm just here to see how the next generation will amount to. Seeing as your generation has mostly disappointed me, I wish to test the mettle of a few, and I was not disappointed." He replied in kind, and his words had the effect of throwing her for a loop. She blinked for a moment until she came to a conclusion of what he could have meant. "You came here for the Uchiha, didn't you?" she asked. There was no other reason he would have come here than for the famed bloodline of the Sharingan Eye. It was no secret the man had a desire to obtain all the jutsu in the world, and with the help of the Sharingan he could do just that. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility if one had that, for beyond its other freaky abilities, it was able to copy almost any in the known world, besides other Kekai Genkai abilities of course. The great snake merely chuckled at his former student's rather astute answer. She was able to figure that out well enough, and she would have been right if Orochimaru hadn't been caught in mid-fight with the Uzumaki. That encounter was still fresh in his mind, and just thinking about it sent a shiver of excitement down his spine. While there was no denying he wanted the Sharingan to fulfill his ultimate desire, he found himself becoming extremely interested in the Uzumaki's development as a whole. He knew the boy's lineage, being one of the last from the infamous Uzumaki clan, and he also knew the boy's parents had been incredibly instrumental in the Third Shinobi World War that he would never deny. His parents had potential, immense potential that outshined everyone in their generation. His father was a shinobi genius the likes of which hadn't been seen since Haddock Tsukumo. His mother was a brilliant woman, an exemplar of what it meant to be a true kunoichi. The woman became world-renowned for her art in the fabled Fuinjutsu, an art rare few outside the Uzumaki clan dabbled in due to the dangers and complexity of the skill. But in her hands, that alone made her a force to be feared and respected on the battlefield, and that wasn't even considering her art in taijutsu and kinjutsu. He respected power above all else, and recognizing potential was something he was able to gain in equal force. And when he fought the Uzumaki, he sensed it. Although he was under the influence of his Bijuu's chakra, he was still able to retain his senses and fully utilize the power the Kyuubi granted him. But it was not that which intrigued Orochimaru so much. It was the boy's potential. That first encounter alone told the Sannin much, and it was enough for him to take the risk of marking him with his latest experimental Juinjutsu, the Naraku no Juin. It was one he was actually afraid to use on any subject because the amount of toll was far too potent for any human body to handle. Even those with extremely strong bodies succumbed to the curse of the seal and were killed from its effects in seconds. But he had a feeling the boy would survive and endure. He wasn't a man that followed his gut as much as his former teammate Jiraiya did. But this boy made him want to do just that, just to see what would come about. Initially, he didn't think much of the boy, seeing him as a failure, but that fight alone showed him that the boy merely lacked a real teacher. Because, as they fought, the boy was picking up on his blocks, counters, and speed frighteningly quick. He was starting to read him, his movements with a perception that some would think he had the Sharingan when he clearly didn't. Instinct brimmed off the boy in waves, and in the shinobi world, instinct was what kept you alive and made you stronger. And that wasn't even considering the fact Danzo had placed a limiter seal on the boy, effectively crippling him in more ways than one. But now that it was off, Orochimaru shivered. Glancing at Anko, Orochimaru decided to tease his wayward student. In manner of speaking, yes I did, but I never did get to enjoy myself with the Uchiha. But I do believe I found a much more intriguing target, a certain fox boy. He hissed, and it took him some restraint to hold back a chuckle when he saw her eyes widen in horrific realization. Which quickly narrowed in a hatred so fierce, it made what hatred she had for him pale much more in comparison. It actually made him stop. Stay away from him. Her hiss was just as strong, if not stronger, and that made Orochimaru a bit proud of her, but nonetheless he found her reaction to this bit of news surprising. Did she know the boy on some level? His initial spy reports had already shown the boy had no one growing up. Unless of course, it went beyond what his spies could uncover. His smirk returned 100-fold as he replied in kind. A bit late for that, Anko-chan. The Uchiha and the Uzumaki bear my mark, so he will come to me of his own free will, it is absolutely certain. And the Sannin took great pleasure in seeing the horrific realization come upon her face once those words were spoken. Her eyes went wide in terror and strangely enough a sense of failure. Interesting. No you didn't. She looked broken by that realization, but Orochimaru didn't care really. So, he let go of the woman and turned around. I have a feeling you'll find out soon enough. Now until then it's been fun, Anko-chan. And without another word Orochimaru melded into the wood, vanishing without a trace and leaving behind the emotionally wrecked woman to her restraints. Tilting her head to the side, Anko's eyes trembled until 2 tears gathered up and fell. No please not Naruto. In her vision, Anko saw a bright little blonde boy with round blue eyes grinning, ignoring the harsh glares directed at him and the insulting whispers spoken behind his back. The face of the saddened boy crying alone in his room with no one to comfort him. The very face of the young boy glaring back into those that made his life hell. The face of the broken boy bedridden in the hospital from a multitude of severe injuries inflicted upon him. He suffered enough. It was moments later she was found by the Hokage's personal Anbu, and when she was freed from her restraints, the captain of the squad tried getting her attention. Mitarashi. Hurry, we need to report your findings back to the Hokage, it's urgent. He knows whatever you found. He spoke, jarring her from her trip down memory lane. Taking a moment to realize what he said, she quickly got up, taking all the information she knew now. The Hokage definitely needed to know about what was going on. You're right, But then something terrifying happened. The blood-curdling scream of such magnitude was heard from miles on end, no doubt being heard by all the occupants of the forest, but the voice of the scream made Anko's blood run cold, for she knew that voice. It was his. What the hell was the poor Anbu captain didn't even get to finish before they were caught unawares by something that made all their blood run cold. For what followed the scream was a shockwave so powerful, it ripped the forest asunder, tearing the trees right out of the ground and disrupting the earth as it went. The 5 were easily blown back as the shockwave began to devastate everything in its path. But the shinobi were able to gain a foothold in time just to see where the point of the shockwaves originated, and what they saw made them feel something else. Fear. A few miles ahead of them, they saw a giant pillar of pure energy pierce the sky. But that alone wasn't the cause of their fear, it was the oppressive, majestic, terrifying, divine feeling it gave off. The clouds swirled around the pillar that disrupted the heavens, but nothing would stop the anomaly of pure power. The feeling of oppression became so strong they were all forced to their knees. What is this? Spoke one of the Anbu captain's subordinates. Anko on the other hand was staring straight at where the pillar was originating. All she could hear from the ravaging winds was his voice, his screaming. Naruto. And when the pillars suddenly vanished into the disrupted sky, Anko stood up and took off toward the location without so much as a warning. What? Mitarashi. Without another word the Anbu followed after the speeding Kunoichi, but nothing the captain said would deter her from finding the source of that. She had to make sure, damn whatever rules that forbid any intervention. She had to make sure he was okay. But nothing would prepare her or anyone for what they were about to witness. Cold black eyes drifted open only to be greeted by a realm of the darkest black. Where am I? Dusan didn't have to die. His head snapped in the direction of the voice only to be stunned when he found himself staring at a little girl. Raven hair fell around her head in a straight mess, but tears continuously fell from her eyes. No, he mouthed out that word before he even knew that he did. In the end, if you don't have the strength you can't do anything. That's what he taught me. The little girl was speaking her mind and he couldn't say anything against it because they were his own words. Because I didn't have the strength the clan was wiped out, nearly everyone was killed, Ka-san was put in a coma. He scowled as memories of the massacre came flooding back, seeing all his dead clansmen slaughtered like cattle, their blood flooded the streets and it stained his soul black. You let them die, all you did was watch. He was floored when the girl spat at him, her equally cold black eyes glaring at him with tears running down her eyes. The expression of anguish, of sorrow, of pain was evident on her face and he nearly lost his composure. No, no, no. If only you had the strength. The little girl's voice slowly changed into one of a deep yet smooth tone, and Sasuke could only watch in sick terror as he watched the little girl rip away at her face, revealing a lone amber-slitted eye. The eye of a snake. No. And in a flash of light, the darkness that surrounded was pierced and was destroyed before a softer voice rang in his ears. It made all his worries, all his fears, all his doubts go to the farthest end of his mind. Sasuke-chan, it's okay to cry. Ka-sen's here. Sasuke saw the image of that same little girl in the warm embrace of her mother, his mother. Ka-sen. Sasuke mumbled to himself before the image bled away and into another. Don't cry, Suko-chan, I'll be fine this time. A voice of a young boy sounded off and it made a cold chill run down her spine when she saw the image become clear. It was her, the little girl again, but she was in the middle of a blood-soaked forest. The blood of life mixed in with the pelting rain, soaked her body to the bone, but she paid it no heed as she kneeled down at the body before her. Unlike her, wounds weren't inflicted anywhere upon her body. The boy in front of, on the other hand, was the polar opposite. His body was riddled with far too many wounds to count, gashes, and cuts from kunai bled profusely from his body. Shurikens still in his little body punctured his flesh and caused blood to bubble upwards. His left arm was twisted at an odd angle, and his right arm was completely pulled out of socket. His usually spiky golden locks were stained with blood, his blood. Yet, despite his state, he was able to gift her with his usual grin, but it did nothing to ease her emotional trauma, as blood stained his usual pearly whites. His round blue eyes were losing the light they usually held. But the grip he had on her own hand was nonetheless strong, as ever. No, Sasuke thought, as he looked upon the image with horrific realization, the memories were beginning to come back. The coldness returned, as she watched the light in the boy's eyes slowly begin to fade. Until they were gone. No, Naruto. The Uchiha was caught off guard when the image suddenly exploded into a bright light. It was so intense that he had to shield his eyes from it, but when it died down, Sasuke opened his eyes again only to find himself staring at himself. Or rather, it looked like him, but it was actually a young girl of his age with loose raven hair. Her coal black orbs were cold, firm, strong, but guarded. She wore the exact same clothing as himself, down the high-collared shirt, white shorts, and shinobi sandals. But her physique was definitely that of a maturing young woman. Her clothes did a good job of hiding her chest area, but he knew that her chest was held back by bindings, as a precaution. However, the major difference was that she was smiling. The frown marred Sasuke's features as he looked at her. Just seeing her made him feel like looking away, but he could not, for that would be to deny his own existence. To deny his own self, but it was for his own protection, his mother had said. At the time he was only confused by what she said, but went along with it anyhow. Disguising herself with the advanced henjas and genjutsus only his mother could ever give. Her skill in the art was nigh untraceable too, and it's why it's worked for all these years. Until now. He needs us. He heard the girl in front of him speak and he saw her reach out with her hand. Her voice was smooth, quiet, and it reminded him just how long he'd gone from using that voice. For fear of people finding out who he really was, but that was a moot point now. Because his best friend needed him, her teammates needed her. And for the longest time, Uchiha Sasuke allowed a small smile to grace his face before he took hold of her hand on his own. And I will help him. He spoke, but his voice slowly but surely became the same tone as the girl's before the two vanished in a bright light before darkness took hold. She couldn't believe this was happening. Sakura, who did this to you? She thought everything would be okay, that she could defend her teammates. So you three did it. But she had been wrong, she had overestimated herself and paid the price for it. Sakura tried to defend her two teammates with all she had, but it proved to be fruitless after being beaten back. It became apparent to her they were merely toying with her at that point, but the ridicule meant nothing to her. If protecting their lives a second longer, then it was all worth it. Unfortunately, however, she had almost been killed if not for the timely interference of the weird boy, Rock Lee, yet he too had fallen prey to the mummified boy with his strange sound techniques, and just when she thought she was about to die, she was saved yet again by Team 10, Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akimichi. For a moment she thought they would have been able to repel them when Ino captured the girl of the Odo team with her clan Shintenshin no Jutsu, but she was proven very wrong when the boy, Zaku his name was, began attacking her. Ah. You're confused. Our goals have nothing to do with safely completing this exam nor getting your stupid scrolls. What we want is to kill Uchiha Sasuke. As for Kin, she had her uses, but now she's just a liability. They were planning to kill her regardless of it being a teammate, and she had been afraid for her friend rival's life at that point, but out of nowhere another team appeared. She didn't know who they were, but it was quickly made apparent that they were teammates with Lee. At first, she and everyone else thought they were interfering, but the Hyuga boy didn't. Because instead, something else saved them. Sasuke. Which led to Sakura's current situation. Her eyes could only stare at the back of the Uchiha she, Ino, and so many other girls sought and crushed on in the academy. He had awoken, but he was different. Strange black flame-like markings were spreading throughout his body, his Sharingan was flaring in complete view. And the intent to kill was crystal clear. Vile purple chakra was swirling about him in such a way that it only seemed to make him all the more fearsome. But the biggest change was that he was in fact a she. Being a girl herself, she couldn't doubt the dramatic change she saw in Sasuke's body, no matter how much her mind wished it to be a lie. Her eyes did not lie. Sasuke's hair was straight and flat, falling past her neckline while covering her ears, while the two twin bangs he had still remained, and the roguish face he once had was no longer present, and instead there was just the face of a girl with a much softer yet firm facial appearance. Having longer eyelashes, soft round cheeks, and plush lips. However, it wasn't just that, but her entire body was just akin to that of a female. But it didn't seem to bother Sasuke at all, and the fact he was a she didn't even detract from the fact she was absolutely scary, as all hell. She could only watch in morbid terror as her once stoic teammate strangely woke and even more strangely turned female, literally began picking apart the Odo genin, Zaku, with little to no restraint. There was no mercy in her movements, no compassion, no sympathy, only the promise of a painful death awaited the Odo genin. You seem very proud of these arms. Sakura could only watch in fright when Sasuke's words were spoken. The Uchiha heiress had her foot planted firmly on his back with boss, his arms behind him, and in her grasp. It was a painful position to be sure, but the way she kept pulling only made the pink-haired girl's blood run cold. Sasuke didn't, Sakura muttered out, but her voice was too weak, too frail to be heard by the changed Uchiha. Hiding in the bushes, the Ina Shikacho of Team 10 could only watch what was happening in a myriad of emotions. Mainly consisting of shock, confusion, but ultimately justified fear. What the hell is with Sasuke? What's happened to him? Choji asked the question in all their minds, but Ino's thoughts were much more aligned with confusion mixed with her initial fright. And why does he look so different? Is he a she? And this chakra is so large and so vile, what happened? Stop you crazy bitch. Zaku's cries shook the girl from her thoughts as the Uchiha merely kept pulling. She seemed to take delight in his pain, finding it a righteous punishment for daring to even hurt her teammate. Her Sharingan eyes spun wildly as she pulled harder and harder and harder. Well, you should have thought of that before attacking my teammates. Now you're going to suffer. And in a quick but firm yank of her arms. Snap. Zaku's scream sounded off all around the area, but it didn't even faze the Uchiha as she dropped him to the ground. His whimpers were music to her ears as she glanced over her shoulder. Taking in every single person that was in the area with a guarded gaze until her eyes landed on the mummified boy, Dosu. And only then did she let loose a demented grin that did not look right on the Uchiha's face. So, you're the last one. I do hope you can give me a better fight, she said, turning around before stalking toward him. And with the steps she made, the marks grew more pronounced and her chakra became stronger and all the more vile. This was a sight that utterly terrified the shaken Dosu Kanuta. The young man had thought he and his team would have been able to complete their objective given to them by their leader, Orochimaru, but they were completely misinformed of the fact Sasuke somehow had come in contact with Orochimaru beforehand and was given the curse mark. Never mind the fact that Uchiha was a girl, she had actually survived the initial process. And he could only watch in slight terror as she picked Zaku apart with little effort at all, and now her gaze was on him. The terror only increased tenfold at that point. Those eyes. Such large and vile chakra. It's just like Orochimaru-sama. I have to get out of here. That was the only reasonable thing he could do at this point. He knew he wouldn't stand a chance against the Uchiha at this point, not with her awakening of the curse mark. That was just asking to be killed. Wait, here you want our scroll, take it. Take it. He fished out the scroll and tossed it to the Uchiha's feet, and for a moment he felt a moment of relief when she stopped to look at the scroll. She did seem to think on it before kicking it backwards, letting it roll to Sakura as she just continued toward him like a predator was to her prey. Thanks, but you're still going to die. That comment only cemented the fear into Dosu as he was frozen by the Uchiha's glare. He took a moment to wonder what else Aku could have done to incur the Uchiha's wrath besides attacking the pink-haired girl. They attacked her, defeated the Taijutsu Weirdo, and the three snot-nosed punks from before. But then Zaku used his attack to crush the Uchiha and her two teammates. That realization made his lone eyes widen before they looked directly behind the Uchiha and the Pinkat to see the Uchiha's third blonde teammate. But he was left shocked when he saw the injured blonde was beginning to let off a Saiyan aura of pure energy. Then it dawned on him. The Uchiha was mad for attacking the blonde. He could only curse Aku's insufferable carelessness at this point. The crunching of steps shook him of his thoughts, and he looked up only to see a pairing of blazing red Sharingan eyes bearing back down on him. His body suddenly began to shake like a leaf inside a hurricane, such was the intensity in her eyes that it made him feel like he was truly staring into the eyes of something truly dark, more vile than anything he had ever known. Not even Orochimaru's chakra was this foul at this point. What are you? That was the only thing he could say as Sasu created her kunai and she could only let loose a cold unforgiving smirk. You're. And like a switch was flipped, the Uchiha stopped at the small sound. The racking pain-filled grunt made her freeze until her head, like all the others, snapped in the direction from where it came. Sharingan eyes widened when she saw it coming from her blonde teammate. But something as different about him was the fact his entire body was convulsing as he was literally consumed in an aura of Saiyan flames. Azure blue mixed with majestic green chakra leaked off his body only to meld together into an aura of Saiyan flames which were engulfing the blonde's body. Naruto. Any amount of bloodluster and sanity was washed away the moment she was in pain. The black marks receded as all thoughts of revenge or hostility was flushed away. Without a second thought she moved in a blur of motion before appearing at his side. She was aware of Sakura coming to her side, but her eyes were strictly stuck on the blonde's state. And what she saw wasn't pretty. He was soaked in sweat and his veins were clearly visible from his paling complexion. Every second or so they bulged and his chest was moving up and down at a frightening yet erratic pace. His breathing was completely out of control, his muscles were tightening and constricting to the point she swore his clothes were beginning to strain against him. Sasuke, look. She heard Sakura speak and glanced at her teammate before looking at where she was pointing, and what she saw was shocking. She only noticed it now, but there was a mark on the blonde collarbone, a wing-like pattern that was glowing, a mix of black and cyan. What is the name of Kami? Ah. Gah. His grunts grew louder and faster, and the Uchiha's worry leaped when she saw his nails digging into the earth. His veins were bulging faster, and his eyes were beginning to flicker and twitch. Naruto. Answer me, damn it. She yelled, but it did nothing. He was far too gone in his current state to even register any outside voices. But then a voice cut out from behind her. Get away from him. She and Sakura turned around to see the Hyuga boy atop the tree branch looking in their direction with his Byakugan activated while a healthy amount of fear appeared in his eyes. Knowing her history on the Byakugan, she knew that they had the greatest when it came to reading the finer points of someone's inner chakra and their chakra network, but she was too late to react in time. The only sign she had was the ground started to tremble before she looked behind her to see the Saiyan energy beginning to intensify, and when Naruto's eyes did open, all she saw was the royal green, glowing green was all she saw before he let loose a scream. Reacting with all the speed she could muster, she grabbed Sakura and dove into the hollow tree nearby. And what followed was nothing short of both spectacular yet utterly frightening. An explosion ripped out from Naruto's body, turquoise energy escaped him as he screamed, and it expanded as it shot upwards, obliterating everything in its path as it shot into the sky and pierced the very heavens themselves. It was surely a spectacle to be seen for Kami knows how far. However, the initial shockwave was the more damaging aspect. It ripped the ground and trees asunder, sending everything flying, and this included anyone not fast enough to react in time. Meaning, Team 10 was sent flying. What the hell? So troublesome. The three were blown back by the force, but Choji reacted in time to utilize his clan's partial growth to catch his teammates and hang on to the biggest tree he could. They knew Naruto was unpredictable, but this was just fucking ridiculous. In a couple of minutes it continued until a great flash of light erupted from the center point of the explosion, and, as it died down, those affected by the blast were able to recover and were greeted with the sight of smoke and debris lifting up in the air and into the atmosphere. It was as if the laws of gravity meant nothing in this single point of the earth. Crawling out from the hollow tree, Sasuke and Sakura found themselves the closest to the proverbial ground zero, as it were. Their breath hitched when the smoke was suddenly wiped away by what looked like a force of wind or slice of gust. And thus, everyone in the area was allowed to see what had happened. Omaikami spoke to the bun-haired girl of the Hyuga's team, and indeed that was all that could be said to sum up what they saw. Even the Hyuga boy's face was a perfect expression of absolute shock. Because, crouched inside a crater the same size as the Pillar of Energy not long ago was, in fact, Uzumaki Naruto. He remained almost entirely unchanged if not for the single fact his upper clothing was completely obliterated, revealing his torso. Strange cyan-colored markings spread out from his body and over his face, but they glowed with intensity. However, the eye-catcher was the fact that behind the Uzumaki's back on his right shoulder was a single angel wing of the purest white. The feathery wing was as white as the heavens, and it gave a soft glow of white radiance before it stretched out its wingspan as the blonde himself stood up. It was silent as a graveyard when his eyes began to open, but for the blonde the very first sight he saw when he opened his eyes was his exhausted teammates. His blue eyes were no longer the same, instead what greeted the two girls were cold but strong cyan orbs. His eyes looked upon them, staring at them with the utmost of care, lingering on Sakura before going to Sasuke, and the only emotion that flashed across his eyes was a sense of surprise. Sakura Sasuke was all the blonde could say before his eyes rolled into the back of his skull, and upon knowing what was coming the blonde's teammates rushed to him. Naruto. The Uchiha caught him before he fell, but the marks upon his body quickly began to recede back into the point of its origin. Along with it, the wing upon the blonde's back folded before it dispersed in a flash of cyan-colored particles. It was only a moment later that the other occupants around them began to gather either out of concern for their fellow shinobi or for others' curiosity. Unknown to them though, they had several eyes watching them from different points. And each one holding varying reactions to what they just witnessed. But none were stronger than one, Anko Mitarashi, who stared from above. She ignored the Anbu watching from behind her eyes were solely glued on the unconscious blonde. Shock was the first emotion she felt before relief began to settle in once she knew that the blonde was safe. Still what she just witnessed. Naruto, what in Kami's name, what did that snake do to you? Now that was the question, wasn't it? An uncomfortable silence permeated a clearing within the wrecked forest of death. Its perimeters, the forest, nay, the entire world seemingly went still at what had just occurred, was still fresh in the minds of those that had just witnessed it. Everyone outside of the forest had felt it. Konohagakure had seen the cyan pillar rip out from the infamous forest, and they had felt the pure raw power explode into the skies of their world. Thereafter resulting in a bright flash that ignited the very skies aflame for what felt like an eternity. All inhabitants outside of Konoha felt it. It was akin to a tremor that reached into every single living soul on the planet, affecting their very souls on such a basic primal level. It left everyone with a solitary sense of fear. The power had been otherworldly. There was simply no other way to explain it. It had lasted for the briefest of seconds, but its sheer untainted power had dwarfed anything this world had ever seen. It made the legends pale in comparison to this supernatural phenomena. So immense it left all the other countries of the world both big and small standing in fear and awe. It was akin to bearing witness to the wrath of the kami. It left the great lords, the daimyos, scurrying in terror. It left everyone and everything on the planet in a state of sheer despair. This would be the day when religious groups around the world called this the beginning of the apocalypse. For the shinobi villages it would be known simply as the Forest of Death phenomena. For the rest of the world it was what marked the beginning of what would be known as the bloodiest and destructive war in the history of their planet. For the select few who experienced it firsthand it would be the start of what would change their lives forever. Yet for Konoha, it would be the day the Chunin exams were cancelled. Standing within the Hokage Tower, the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, stood before the windows of his office overlooking his beloved home. He was perched there like a statue, his eyes shadowed by the rim of his cage hat, and his body seemingly appearing to be frail and even tired. Yet for the other occupants in office they knew that it was a simple ruse to what lay beneath, for in that deceptively frail and weak frame lay the strength and genius shinobi that had become known as the Kami no Shinobi. The other occupants of the room were the two esteemed elders of the Konohagakure Council, advisors to the Hokage and the old teammates of Sarutobi Hiruzen, all of whom belonged to Team Tobirama. Koharu stared at the back of Hiruzen in what some would have considered a worried frown in her expression. Whilst Hamura stood stone still, his expression is an exemplar of a stone statue. Cold and resolute. I will not waste time with you two. You know why I have called you here. Their Hokage broke the silence in the room, and the two stood still once they heard his voice. It was not the voice of the man some of the generation had come to see as their grandfather. This was the voice of the man who had become world-renowned for his ingenuity in times of war. His voice was absolute, and his words defined his complete authority. There would be no questioning him, and there would be not a single act of disobedience. When he spoke, you listened and acted on his order. As of right now, reports have been flying in from our spies in the other villages. The chatter has been non-stop since the event, and Jiraiya has seen fit to give me multiple reports on the activities of all the major villages and daimyos. They've acted by calling back all their shinobi, including those attending the exams. They are bolstering their forces, and, as we speak, the daimyos of the other countries are squabbling with our daimyo over what had just happened. Some even outright threaten war should an answer not be given to them. He said this before turning to address them. However, we will not submit on this. They will take nothing, and we shall give them everything Konoha has to offer in terms of bloodshed. As of this moment, I declare the exams are from henceforth cancelled, and all foreign shinobi are to be made to leave within 24 hours. Any stragglers are to be considered POWs. If any are found, they are to be captured and sent to T&I. Those that fight are to be killed on sight. He continued, his tone of voice never raising or lowering. Equal and balanced was what described Hiruzen the most at this very moment. Amura, Kaharu, you two are spreading the word too. I, the Sandaime Hokage, am issuing yellow alerts for the village. All shops are to be closed within the hour and everyone to return to their homes. The Jonin senseis of the teams in the Chunin exams are to retrieve their students, and every other available Jonin is to increase patrols both in and outside the village for any potential spies escaping or coming into the village. Screening of foreigners is to be handled by the Yamanakas henceforth. Should any show signs of opposition, they are to be captured and sent to T&I. He stated, listing off every notion of increase of security. I want a message sent to the Anbu Satecho to meet me within the hour, and another message is to be sent to all clan heads. In preparation for possible war, I am issuing for the reformation of the War Council, is that understood? He finalized his words, and they simply gave a nod of acceptance. Once they saw his eyes, they knew it would be impossible for them to change his minds. And also, the Anbu detachment I sent alongside Mitarashi Anko are to report back to me immediately. Now go. He ordered, and they wordlessly complied. For the first time in years, their bodies tensed and moved with the ease of a shinobi as they vanished in a swirl of smoke and leaves. As they disappeared to carry out his word, Hiruzen turned back to look over his village, and his eyes looked upward into the cloudy science sky that had been the aftermath of the phenomena. A frown wrinkled in his features as his eyes glazed over at what he had experienced. Power. Unbridled fury. Terrifying in its majestic splendor. His eyes narrowed as his thoughts began to change. Whatever that was, I must find out to distinguish if it is a threat to Konoha or not. That power was far beyond anything I've seen in my years. Even the Kyuubi's power from that night couldn't compare to that. And the thought of the Kyuubi made his frown deepen as his thoughts changed to his wayward grandson and all but blood. In spite of all this chaos and the more to come, please be safe, Naruto. He offered a silent prayer before he opened his eyes as he felt the appearance of another in his office. Danzo uttered as an old man silently walked up beside the Hokage. His cane clacking on the floor before standing beside the Hokage. You called, Hiruzen. Danzo replied, to which Hiruzen frowned before he sent a cold stare to his old friend. It's time we talk about war, Shimura Danzo. My first order, the reformation of Root. He said, his eyes were cold yet solemn in what he was saying. Danzo's lone eye widened in surprise at what he had just heard before turning to address his leader, only for his shock to disappear once he saw the look in Hiruzen's eyes. This wasn't the elderly frail man he had seen his friend becoming in times of peace. This was the man of legend he was speaking with, the man he respected above all else. A smirk stretched his features before finally replying. It will be done, Hokage-sama. In the central tower within the Forest of Death, the inhabitants of it were running damage control, whilst those that had made it through the forest were left to their respective senseis to keep them under control. Some of those that had made it were from other villages such as Kumo, Iwa, Suna, and Kusa. However, there was no sign of any Konoha teams or of the Solodo team as well. Whilst the censors of these respective teams went about calming the emotions of their respective teams, some of them were left to ponder on what had just occurred. One particular redhead whose ruby wine red eyes took in the whole situation with a form of such terror that it rattled her to the very core. Being the type of person she was, the young woman was internally wrecked, as she had been one of the rare few with the chakra sensory trait born within them. Thus, when the event had occurred and she was just reaching the tower, she had not just felt it, she had not just heard it or seen it on a level that no one could have truly perceived. There's no way what I saw was that it was so dense, so strong, like staring straight into the core of the sun, but it was so warm and so bright. Her mind was in turmoil over what she had seen. She remained silent to even the prodding of her teammates, but the sensei for the Odo team watched her with a particular amount of curiosity in his snake-like eyes. The Odo team sensei was a rather pale man with the usual uniform for the Itagakure shinobi. His black hair was long and straight, which was tied up in a high ponytail. Currently, he stood in the corner watching the proceedings with amusement, and while he glanced at the traumatized redhead, his mind went back to what he himself had seen, as well. Recollecting on the experience of what he had felt and seen for himself. And he suppressed a grin that threatened to split his face and instead let loose a satisfied smirk. It would seem you've gone and not just met my expectations, but you've managed to go above and beyond them, Naruto-kun. There is no doubt now, if you were accepted by the Naraku no Juin, then you are the holder of something beyond this world. The mere thought brought a shiver down the disguised Orochimaru as he thought about his latest prospect of interest. However, I underestimated the effect this would have. That power goes beyond the origin of this is something truly alien. Now, what will be your move, sensei? Orochimaru thought about this. The effect of this was something not even he expected, thus if his former sensei chose to cancel the Chunin exams, then he would have little choice but to pull back both the Odo and Suna forces. Although it would give them time to bolster their forces, Orochimaru was more interested in what would occur in that time frame. There was no doubt in his mind that Hiruzen would call back his forces, Jiraiya would be a definite, and if push came to shove he knew his former sensei would be shrewd enough to force Konoha's runaway princess Tsunade back to Konoha if it came down to it. It was a strategy of war protocol, bolster your forces in the event of total war, and if what just happened was anything to go by, then there was a good chance of that happening. After all, something or better yet someone had just unleashed that amount of power that was unrivaled, even to the. Thus, as history has recorded, humans will fight to gain control over it and thus bring about another world war that'll stain this blood-stained world anew. But then again, what better way for Naruto-kun and Sasuke-chan to prosper than in the thick of war? Smiling at the thought, Orochimaru's gaze fell on the Suna team and, as he glanced at their sensei Baki who met his eyes. An order was made between Orochimaru, to which the Suna shinobi frowned but gave the slightest motion of a nod to agreement. Then Orochimaru cast his gaze to the Suna siblings and his smirk only grew when he looked at the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi. Tsubaku no Gaara, youngest daughter to the Yondaime Kazukiage, Rasa, was as unstable can get. However, contrast to her normal personality that was a monotone human being which hid the psychopathic killer underneath, now it would seem the girl was also suffering from what he had felt as well, but it was of a different kind. Yet in contrast to her personality on the outside, she was a peculiar sight to behold. Those with experience from the past would almost mistake her for an Uzumaki due to her shoulder-length spiky red hair. Her fair skin was a striking contrast to her blood-red hair and teal eyes, and she was already growing into a beautiful young woman that would have garnered the attention of many if not for her personality being as twisted as it was. One distinctive feature she had was the tanuki black rings around her eyes, which seemed to be more from an extreme case of sleep deprivation. The young girl was suffering though, but more than from just a sense of overwhelming fear. The very question of her existence was being threatened as the aftereffects of that power still overwhelmed her. Her body, soul, and mind felt like they were being pushed to the brink of oblivion and would either submit to this power or plummet to its doom. It took all her strength to just keep standing, but even then that was a struggle in itself. However, she would find a support not even she expected. From the very thing she viewed as her mother. That power was similar to father, but different as well. Was this what you spoke of, father? Whoever released that power, is that the person you spoke of? Shukaku thought to itself before making up its mind on the matter. For centuries Shukaku had suffered along with its brethren the machinations of mankind. For so long they suffered that Shukaku, the youngest of them all, developed a persona of a short-tempered entity. Quickly prone to anger and lust for blood to sate its own hatred for mankind, it would lash out at anything or anyone that crossed its path. Yet in this moment, in this singular moment of time, this event caused Shukaku to stop. The power washed over and had literally cleansed of all its hatred it had accumulated over the centuries. Thus, allowing it to think freely without the influence of its anger taking control. And now, free of its hatred, Shukaku planned to find the source of this power and begin repercussions. First and foremost being the mental recovery of its vessel. Girl, no, Gaara, no matter what it takes, you must find the source of that power. Find the one who released it and I guarantee you will find meaning in your existence. Shukaku spoke to the girl who froze once she heard its voice. Yet from out of all the other times it had spoken, this time its voice was crystal clear. There were no threats, no calling for bloodshed. It was just calm. Being raised, guided, and protected by this voice, she knew better than to question the voice. Yes, mother. Replying, Shukaku frowned at her response and decided to later set her straight on what he was, but for now more important things took priority. Good, but for now work to stabilize yourself, and when the chance presents itself take it. You will have my full aid when that moment comes. They started causing Gaara to frown before giving the mental equivalent of a nod. But in the recesses of her own mind, as she began to ease into the effects the power had over her for one peculiar reason or another, an image of a Konoha shinobi faded into mind. As if it was the representation of what this power was, or perhaps it was the appearance of the one who unleashed this power. The face was of a grinning golden spiky-haired idiot, yet his blue eyes were a solemn emotion. An emotion she was all too familiar with. An uneasy smile made its way across her face, and while her brother and sister may have seen and felt a little disturbed by it, for her, it was a way to express her relief. No matter how small it may be. I at least have a face, now I just need a name of the man who can give my existence meaning. It all happened so fast. There was literally nothing that she could do or say. It happened the moment Naruto fell unconscious, everything seemingly went still before time resumed, and what came next put them all on edge. By order of the Sandaime Hokage, the Chunin exams are from henceforth cancelled, and the village is now under a state of alert. Code Yellow has been established for an elevated threat of war. All Konoha applicants are to be gathered up by their respective sensei and taken back to the academy for a debriefing. All foreign shinobi have 24 hours to leave, and any stragglers will be considered prisoners of war. Any that oppose shall be killed on sight. That had been word of mouth from her own sensei Kakashi, who had appeared at their location, along with the senseis of Team 10 and 9. It had been the first time she had ever seen Kakashi so serious before, and it rattled her a bit, but she kept a strong head on her shoulders. Not for just herself, but for Sakura as well, who was practically a basket case at this point. She had been staring at the unconscious form of their battered teammate with an unguarded amount of shock and sorrow. She couldn't really blame her either, for she herself had yet to move her eyes from, as well, but for it was more than just what Sakura was feeling. Sasuke, or for what her mother had named her the moment she had been born, Uchiha Sasuko, was feeling a turbulence of emotion since her deformation of her disguise. Memories unchained came rushing back to her, memories she always wanted to forget came back. Moments of her life before being forced to hide who she really was. Memories of when she had been nothing more than that of an innocent child. Without having to bear the burden of living in Itachi's shadow. The jealousy of fighting for father's attention. And the urge to always train with her brother. It had been moments of her life that had been saved up within her soul. No matter how much it scarred her being. Moments in her life when she had made her first friend in a child her mother invested as much time in as her at the orphanage. A child who had been a grinning little loon full of energy had become her first friend in her first tender moments of childhood. A little boy, ostracized by the whole of the village, loved by her mother, and a boy who. Blood sprayed into the air, overshadowing that cloudless full moon sky. A battered and beaten boy stood in front of her, his grin full of bloody teeth was strong, in spite of the pain he was in. I ain't gonna let anybody hurt you, Suko-chan. You're my friend, and for being my friend I won't let anyone hurt you for as long as I live. Her frown deepened in a scowl as she looked at Naruto, who was being carried on Kakashi's back, while Sakura was held in a fireman's carry in his other arm. Staring at his battered and beaten form made her look away, for it only brought back those memories. Stupid done. The last member of the four was in a state of mind that his three students would have found surprising if they knew. Being ahead of them, as he led them out of the forest, his lone eye was narrowed as his thoughts led to a disconcerting path. I saw something on that video feed before it blacked out. It was Sasuke for sure, but then she saw Naruto and went to him, but after that bright flash of light, it was Naruto in that crater. He thought about this as he glanced at the mentally and emotionally scarred Sakura. Then he glanced at the entirely changed Sasuke, a classified S-rank secret if he ever saw one, but one he would not question until it was brought up. Sasuke was just as banged up as Sakura, if not more so. He could see she was struggling to even move, let alone keep pace, and her being marked by Orochimaru didn't help matters at all. Plus, if the staring she'd been doing to Naruto was any indication, then his well-being was more important to her than anything right now, which only rattled his nerves more. What happened to my students in this damned forest? For the first time, Kakashi felt his responsibility for his students' well-being crashing onto him with the full force of Kyuubi's. He had been too hasty introducing them to the exams, his confidence in their abilities and short-sightedness led to this incident, and they paid the price for his mistake. They had been marred by this whole thing, and a certain traitor had marked both Sasuke and Naruto with a seal that made him want to scream bloody murder. I'm going to correct my mistakes from the past. I am going to kill you for this, Orochimaru. He cursed before he surprised Sasuke by throwing her over his right shoulder before he tripled his speed. All the while he never noticed Naruto's expression twitching or scrunching up in pain. his eyes flickering and twitching as his brain shot up into highly active mode to process what was happening both on the outside and inside his body. I failed him. A solemn voice echoed within the reaches of Naruto's mindscape. We both failed him, a female voice replied in opposition of the man's statement. The sins of the village cannot be forgiven. Through his own method, Orochimaru has given him a chance of freedom. The man spoke in kind. I agree, and we will be there for him every step of the way, as we should have from the very beginning. Spoke the female whose turn rose in emotion. Agreed dear, the power of the life stream blocks even the Shinigami from taking the remnants of our souls. Nothing impedes us now. The man said, a smile crossing his handsome features. Nothing will stop us from seeing our son, no demon, no monster, and especially not some pasty-faced white fucker of a god. The fiery woman shouted in kind, getting a chuckle from the man in turn, though he was in full agreement. We are in agreement, now we only need your say in this endeavor. What say you? The man spoke, his voice echoing in the remnants of his son's mindscape. His icy blue eyes staring at bits and pieces of a shattered cage and onto the form of tremendously giant iridescent nine-tailed fox whose cyan-colored slitted orbs glanced his way with amusement. Its form easily dwarfs that of the Hokage monument by 10x. Kurama. They chuckled before letting loose a grin, and it was all teeth. I'm in. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, link is in the description. See you next time, till then sayonara.